1,045 tons. That's how much gold central banks bought in 2024, and in 2023, another 1,037 tons. And in 2022, 1,136 tons, the highest single year since 1967. 3 consecutive years above 1,000 tons. For context, the average between 2010 and 2021 was 473 tons per year. They've more than doubled their buying. Exposed. But here's what makes this absolutely critical to understand. The institutions that print money are hoarding the one asset that can't be printed. The people who create currency are buying the thing that replaces currency. This isn't portfolio diversification. This is preparation. Because there's a pattern here. A pattern that's repeated every single time before a major monetary crisis. Same sequence, same behavior, same outcome. In 1965, central banks started demanding gold for their dollars. 6 years later, the dollar collapsed against gold, and the entire Bretton Woods system fell apart. In 2008, after the financial crisis, central banks flipped from sellers to buyers for the first time in decades. What followed was the largest monetary expansion in modern history. And right now we're watching the third wave, bigger than both previous ones combined. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why they're buying, what they know that you don't, and what this pattern tells us about what's coming next. Stay with me. Because this might be the most important financial signal of the decade. Let me show you the numbers. Not speculation. Verified data from the World Gold Council, the IMF, and central bank reports. 2022. Central banks bought 1,136 tons of gold. Record year, the most since 1967. 2023. 1,037 tons. Second highest on record. 2024, 1,045 tons. Third consecutive year above 1,000 tons. That's 3,218 tons in 3 years. More than double what they bought in the 3 years before that. 104% increase. And who's buying? Poland, the largest buyer in 2024 with 90 tons. Their central bank governor publicly stated his goal, 20% of reserves in gold. They've now hit that target and they're still buying. China officially added over 300 tons since 2022. But here's what most people miss. Unofficial estimates from commodity traders suggest China actually holds over 5,000 tons, more than double what they publicly report. They're buying off the books, quietly, systematically. India, nearly 900 tons now, about 12% of their reserves. Turkey, Kazakhstan, Czech Republic, Singapore, UAE, Qatar. Over 23 countries increased gold reserves in the first half of 2025 alone. This isn't one country hedging. This is a global coordinated movement. And here's the critical number. Gold now represents 20% of total central bank reserves worldwide, up from 15% just 2 years ago. For the first time in decades, gold's share of global reserves has surpassed the euro. The institutions that control the money supply are systematically converting that money into something they can't control. The question is, why? Why now? February 26, 2022. 2 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States, European Union, and their allies did something unprecedented. They froze approximately $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves. With a keystroke, $300 billion. Gone. Inaccessible. Assets that Russia had accumulated over decades, held in safe Western institutions, frozen overnight. Now I want you to understand what this meant to every central banker watching. If you held dollars in a US bank, they could be frozen. If you held euros in a European bank, they could be frozen. If you held pounds in a British bank, they could be frozen. Your reserves, the foundation of your country's financial security, were not actually yours. They were conditional. They existed at the pleasure of Western governments. The World Gold Council survey after this event found something remarkable. 1 out of 4 central banks cited concerns about sanctions as a primary driver of their gold purchases. They said it explicitly, on record. But gold sitting in your own vault, in your own country, that cannot be frozen, cannot be sanctioned, cannot be seized with a keystroke. Russia had 2,300 tons of gold in their vaults when the sanctions hit. That gold is still there, still accessible, still liquid. The value of Russia's gold reserves has increased 72% since 2022, a $96 billion windfall, while $300 billion in foreign currency sits frozen. Every central banker on the planet learned the same lesson that day. If your reserves can be frozen, they're not really yours. Gold became not just a store of value, it became a tool of sovereignty. And the buying accelerated immediately. Stage 1 of the pattern, the trigger event. Check. Now, let me show you why this matters. Because this isn't the first time central banks have rushed into gold before a monetary crisis. There's a pattern, and it's repeated every single time. Under the Bretton Woods system, the dollar was backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign central banks could exchange their dollars for physical gold at that rate. But by the 1960s, the US was printing dollars to finance the Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, and Cold War military expansion. Far more dollars existed than the US had gold to back them. In 1960, foreign holdings of dollars were roughly equal to US gold reserves. By 1971, foreign central banks held $50 billion in dollar reserves. The US had only $10 billion in gold. 5 to 1. Central banks saw the math, and they started demanding gold. France was first. In 1965, President Charles de Gaulle announced France would convert its dollar reserves to gold. French ships literally sailed to New York to collect their bullion. Germany followed, then others. The London Gold Pool, a consortium of central banks trying to maintain the $35 price, collapsed in 1968 under the selling pressure. By August 1971, France sent a warship to New York to collect their remaining gold. Britain requested $3 billion in gold transfers. On August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced the US would suspend gold convertibility. Temporarily. That temporary measure is still in effect today. 54 years later, the dollar lost 98% of its value against gold, from $35 per ounce to over $3,000 today. The pattern. Central banks see the problem before the public. They convert to gold. The system breaks. Currency holders get destroyed. For 2 decades before 2008, Western central banks were net sellers of gold. They thought gold was a barbarous relic. They sold hundreds of tons per year. Then Lehman Brothers collapsed. The entire financial system nearly imploded. Central banks printed trillions to bail out the system. Something shifted. In 2010, for the first time in decades, central banks became net buyers of gold. And they haven't stopped since. 15 consecutive years of net buying. They saw what unlimited money printing meant for currency values. They saw what financial system fragility looked like, and they quietly started accumulating. Gold went from $800 per ounce in 2008 to over $1,900 by 2011. Same pattern. Crisis reveals system fragility. Central banks convert to gold. Currency devalues. And now we're in phase 3. The sanctions trigger of 2022 plus unprecedented debt levels plus accelerating de-dollarization. The buying has never been stronger. Stage 2 verified. The historical pattern is repeating. So what exactly are they preparing for? Let me give you the data points that central bankers are watching. US national debt, $38.5 trillion, growing at $6.2 billion per day. Interest payments exceeded $1 trillion in 2024 for the first time ever. The Congressional Budget Office projects debt will reach 156% of GDP by 2055. Dollar reserve share. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has declined from 71% in 2000 to 59% in 2023, not collapsing, but steadily eroding. Alternative systems being built. China's CIPS, their alternative to SWIFT, processed over 150 trillion yuan in 2023, 50% increase in 1 year. Over 40 countries are testing or implementing yuan-based trade settlement. Gold price signal. Gold just hit all-time highs above $3,000 per ounce. When the institutions that print money are the ones buying, they're voting with their balance sheets. The World Gold Council surveyed central banks in 2025. 95% expect global gold reserves to increase over the next 12 months. Not might increase. Expect to increase. 43% plan to increase their own holdings, up from 29% last year. 0%, not a single central bank surveyed, expects their gold reserves to decline. They're not hedging, they're positioning. And here's the part that should concern you. Central banks have access to information you don't. They see capital flows before they're public. They know their own monetary policies. They understand the debt mathematics. When 95% of them agree on a direction, they're not guessing. They're preparing for something they can see coming. The JP Morgan forecast, gold to $4,000 by mid-2026, potentially $5,000 by year end, $6,000 longer term. These aren't gold bugs making predictions. This is the largest bank in America telling you where they think this is going. Now, here's what people always say at this point. But the dollar is still dominant. This time is different. Technology will save us. AI will create growth. Let me address this directly. The British pound was the reserve currency for 200 years. It failed. Reserve currency status isn't permanent. It's conditional. It requires trust, stability, fiscal discipline. And those conditions are eroding. Technology didn't save the Roman Empire when they debased their currency. The Industrial Revolution didn't save Britain from losing reserve status. Innovation doesn't overcome monetary mathematics. And the most dangerous assumption, someone will fix it. Central banks aren't betting on someone fixing it. They're buying gold. They're preparing for what happens if no one fixes it. So what does this mean practically? First, understand the signal. When the institutions that control money are buying the one thing that competes with money, they're telling you something. Not through press releases, through their actions. Second, the timeline is accelerating. 3 consecutive years of record buying. 95% expecting more. The pattern that preceded 1971 took 6 years to complete. The pattern that preceded 2008 took 2 years. This wave started in 2022. We're 3 years in. Third, diversification isn't optional anymore. If central banks, with all their information, all their resources, all their expertise, are diversifying out of their own currencies into gold, that's a message worth hearing. This isn't fear-mongering. This is pattern recognition. The same institutions that told you inflation was transitory. The same institutions that told you the banking system was stable in 2008. The same institutions that print the money you hold. They're converting to gold. Right now. At record pace. That's not a prediction. That's documented behavior. Here's the reality. Central banks don't make moves like this by accident. They don't coordinate at this scale without reason. They don't triple their buying rate because they're bored. 1,136 tons in 2022. 1,037 tons in 2023. 1,045 tons in 2024. Over 3,200 tons in 3 years. More than 100% above the previous decade's average. The institutions that print money are buying the one asset they can't print. The pattern is clear. The signal is visible. The question is whether you'll see it now, while they're still accumulating, or only after the consequences are obvious. Subscribe now because the next video breaks down exactly which assets have outperformed during every historical currency crisis, which ones collapsed first, and how wealth actually transfers when monetary systems reset. The pattern doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't require your permission. It simply unfolds. What you do with this information is up to you.